October 1964. Nikita Khruschev is at his Black Sea estate, drafting a plan to fix the Soviet Union's struggling harvests. At 70 years old, he appears to be at the absolute peak of his power. The peace is interrupted by a high-frequency KGB phone line. His colleagues in the Kremlin are calling him back to Moscow for an urgent meeting. When Khrushchev's plane touches down in the capital, the trap is already set. His longtime chief bodyguard has been dismissed, replaced by a fresh security detail answering only to the KGB chief, a man Khrushchev personally promoted. This was a coup led by his closest allies, including Leonid Brezhnev. It raises a central question. How did a master survivor who outlasted Joseph Stalin's deadliest purges walk blind into a trap orchestrated by his own inner circle? To understand the man, you have to look at the village of Kalinovka. Born into a world of dirt floors and log huts, Khrushchev had almost no formal education. His childhood was defined by manual labor, tending sheep and fetching wood from the age of 7. He wore woven linden bark shoes, a universal symbol of the impoverished Russian peasant. By his teens, he moved to the industrial Donbass region, cleaning coal mine boilers, a job that required him to crawl through soot and ash for 12 hours a day. Young Khrushchev once argued with his coworkers about which was better, education or power. He chose power. He reasoned that if he seized control first, he could simply take the schools and obtain the respect he lacked. This choice, to prioritize raw authority over formal intellect, created a restless, deeply ingrained ambition. It became the engine for an unlikely ascent from a boiler room to the center of the Soviet Empire. Inside the Bolshevik ranks, Khrushchev adopted a brilliant survival mechanism. He played the role of the mujik, the uncultured, hyperactive peasant fool. By acting like a blunt workhorse, he appeared non-threatening to the men above him. But the fool was a willing participant in the system's most violent acts. Khrushchev proved his loyalty to Joseph Stalin by aggressively presiding over the 1930s purges, signing off on the arrests and deaths of thousands to prove he was a reliable soldier. When Stalin died, Khrushchev was surrounded by lethal rivals, like the secret police chief, Lavrentiy Beria, but they underestimated him. Weaponizing his persona as an unassuming activist, he turned his colleagues against Beria and eventually seized total control. Living for 2 decades in a state of forced, high-stakes performance under Stalin blurred the line between the role and the man. Once he took the top spot, he no longer had a superior to act as a restraint. The frantic energy and lack of filter that had once kept him alive were now the only tools he knew how to use to lead. Now, as the sovereign, his leadership became a series of impulsive sprints. He shocked the world with a secret speech denouncing Stalin's crimes, attempting to dismantle the very system of fear that had protected him for years. This sudden shift sparked unintended chaos. In Hungary, citizens took his words as an invitation to revolt, forcing Khrushchev to send in tanks to crush an uprising he had inadvertently encouraged. On the world stage, his diplomacy swung between peaceful overtures and aggressive bluster. This tension snapped when an American U-2 spy plane was shot down over Soviet territory, leading Khrushchev to publicly humiliate the U.S. president and collapse a major peace summit. This restlessness culminated in his most dangerous gamble, secretly placing nuclear missiles in Cuba. He brought the world to the edge of nuclear war before he was forced into a very public withdrawal. His domestic policies were equally chaotic. In a desperate attempt to jumpstart the economy, he decided to split the Communist Party in half, creating 2 separate, competing bureaucracies for industry and agriculture. The result was paralysis. Harvests failed, food shortages spread, and the Soviet bureaucracy was left in a state of constant, exhausting reorganization. By 1964, Khrushchev's leadership had become a state of perpetual instability. His colleagues realized that the man who had outlasted Stalin was now too volatile to follow. Back in the Kremlin, Khrushchev faces a tribunal of his own former loyalists. They read out a long indictment of his failures, specifically attacking his hasty and erratic behavior and his tendency to ignore his advisors in favor of his own whims. Instead of fighting, the exhausted survivor surrenders. He accepts the unanimous vote, returns to his residence, and hands over his black briefcase of state secrets to his son. The coup succeeded because Khrushchev had systematically alienated every pillar of Soviet power. From the military to the intelligentsia, he had left himself with no one to call for help. He lived out his remaining years as an unperson. His name was erased from official histories, and he was physically isolated in a wooden dacha outside Moscow. But he didn't stop talking. In his final act of defiance, he secretly dictated his memoirs into a tape recorder, ensuring his voice would be heard long after the KGB tried to bury him. Despite his failures, Khrushchev was the first Soviet leader to stop using mass execution as a standard tool of governance. He attempted, however awkwardly, to put a human face on an inhumane system. Ultimately, he could not escape his own survival mechanisms. The restless, hyperactive traits that allowed an uneducated metalworker to rise through the Bolshevik ranks were the exact same forces his colleagues cited when they finally removed him from power.